Good day, crew. With everything that was happening over the Christmas period, it's been over a month since I was out on the water. Conditions weren't the best for what I wanted to do this trip, but with such a gap, I was happy just to get out. The results didn't matter quite so much. That was just as well because the results weren't all that good. But I did have a great time on the water, and there are a few tips to be had in this video. A lot of people ask about catching live bait, so I'll spend a little bit of time on that. Whenever you go out fishing, it's worth spending quite a bit of time looking for bait. It will definitely improve your results. When I locate the bait on the sounder, I reduce the speed to idle and I deploy the Minn Kota with the motor aligned in the direction of travel to reduce the drag. I turn around and retrace my track to locate the bait again. And while I'm doing all this, I keep the Minn Kota remote in my hand with my finger over the spot lock button so I can press it as soon as I'm over the bait school. Now this section of the video will run until the time code shown in the upper left corner of the window, or look down in the video description for the chapters if you want to skip ahead. I'm going to keep the sounder screen up in the top right corner of the window. That way you can see what I see on the sounder as I catch the live bait. The top sounder screen shows the traditional 2D sonar that's split into high and low frequency panels. The bottom sonar screen is my 3D view. The 3D view is configured to only show stronger returns, so it shows larger fish and dense bait schools, but not small schools of bait. The 3D view isn't necessary, but it does help me to determine where I should target or if I should move the boat a little bit. Don't worry if you don't have a 3D view. You can get all the information you really need on 2D view. It just means you might need to work a little bit harder to put your boat in the best location. Whatever sounder you've got, being able to read that sounder and identify bait is the most important consideration of all. As you can see, the bait is down there, but it's not a super dense school, and I'm mostly pulling up 1s and 2s. That isn't unusual, but it is of course nicer when you can pull up a full string at a time. Here's a different sonar view, this time from my time 0 unit. Same subject, same spot, just a different representation of it. I generally find that I get a larger string of bait each drop when I'm fishing on a larger school of bait. This is the time 0 display I was just talking about, shown on the top section of the screen. The Furuno TZ3 display that we've been looking at is along the bottom of the screen. Both displays are synchronized, so they're displaying the same data, just using different formats to put it on the screen. I find all of these different views are really useful when I'm hunting for larger fish, especially offshore, but not so much when I'm looking for live bait. I'm mainly showing the different views here so that you can see what the bait looks like on different sounders, and hopefully relate that to your sounder. Once you've located the bait, the main purpose of the sonar is to keep an eye on the bait as it moves, to stay over it, and if it is sparse, to know when to expect you'll get a hookup. Bait fish may appear suicidal at times, but if you're not paying attention, it's easy to miss the hookup. As far as keeping track of the bait while you're jigging, any one of these displays will work for that. However, I find it easier to use one that shows a history of the bait movement rather than an Ascape style display. Wherever there's bait, there's also likely to be predators. So once you have a little bit of live bait, or even after you pull your first live bait up, you should rig up a rod and get that out there. In this instance, I'm using a Shimano Therese rod with a Penn Spinfisher 6 8500 live liner reel, and that is spooled with 40-pound Power Pro braid. I have 5 meters of 40-pound Troll Pro leader with a number 2 ball sinker on top of a single 8A Troll Pro circle hook. You might notice that the bait is a bit smaller than usual, which is why I've opted for a single hook rather than my usual Snell rig. Given the size of the bait, the 8A circle hook is arguably too big, but I usually catch slightly larger bait, so the 8A circle hook is what I had. So even if you've got to improvise a little bit, get that live bait out there as soon as you can, in case there are predators hanging around the school. When you're catching live bait, it's inevitable that you're going to catch some undersized species that must be returned to the water. Where possible, try to do this without touching the fish to give it the best chance of survival. You'll notice on the sonar that the school of bait under the boat varies in density. Sometimes there's a relatively thick school of bait down there, and at other times it is sparser. I don't worry too much about how thick the school is, so long as I continue to pull up the bait. If the school disappears altogether, give it a little bit before you move off to chase it, because it might just be a gap in the school and it'll come back through again. Here's a good tip. I've tried to count the number of fish in the live well, but beyond a few, it's impossible. They move around too much. What I do now is take a photo on my phone and then count the fish in the photo. Much easier. And why do you need to do this? Well, the only time it really matters is for yakkers with a limit of 20. Most other bait species have a limit of 50, and I will never have that many in my small live well. If I'm catching many yakkers, then all I have to do is keep a count in my head of how many non-yakkers I've caught. That way I can count the fish in the photo, subtract the number of non-yakkers, and if the result is less than 20, I'm golden. Now this is one lucky fish. He flipped himself onto the lid of the live bait tank and was back in the water before I had a chance to do anything. On the other hand, the sabiki rig I'm using on this day isn't one of my favourites, at least not when I'm fishing on a small school of bait. This rig lacks the shiny fish skin on the hooks, which seems to attract a better bite when the fish are a bit reluctant or the school is small. On the other hand, when the fish are feeding strongly or the bait school is large, both rigs seem to work equally well. Which one I use mainly depends on which one I can buy at a reasonable price at the time. Here's another still of the bait tank with a few more fish in it. Pause the video for a second and see how easy it is to count them. Of course, even on a sabiki rig, you will still get the odd dirty grinner. Lots of people say to use these as bait, but personally I have never had a fish bite on them. In fact, I reckon if you've got the smell of grinner on your hands when you're handling your normal bait, I think that puts the fish off biting your normal bait. The only thing I've ever found grinner are good for is crab bait. The crabs seem to like them. Here, the school on the sounder has all but disappeared, but I'm still pulling in the live bait. That's okay for a short period, so long as you're still getting a few. 2 or 3 minutes later, there's a few more fish on the sounder, but they are spread out. Again, that's okay, I'm still pulling them up. Again, you can see the benefit of taking a still to count the live bait. I have 23 in the tank, I know 5 or 6 aren't yakkers, so I'm good. You might wonder if I'm going to use 23 live baits in one trip. Well, no I'm not, but I do intend to freeze whatever I have left over for future use. It's a little bit hard to see here, but I'm trying a 3/8 ounce weFish-AU jig hook with the live bait. I've never done this before, so I don't know if it will work at all, but I have a circle hook on the other rod, so I thought I'd give this a try. I'm spot locked up current from the structure that I want to fish on, so I'm casting back towards the structure as far as I can. And since I can't cast that far, I also leave the bail arm open so that the fish can swim or drift back towards the structure. Getting the first bit of interest didn't take too long. This is a rod with the 8-bar circle hook, and whatever it was that took my bait for a run did so without hooking up. I generally like to put a bit of burley in the water. Yes, it does attract the vermin, but it also attracts the good fish that you want to catch. I used to mince up my old bait and hang it over the side in a net or a pot, but these days I just throw it into the burley tube and use the plunger to break it up. I mentioned earlier that I freeze my leftover bait for the next trip in case I can't get any live bait. I might take that frozen bait out once or maybe even twice as backup bait. After that, it becomes burley on the next trip. This is rebaiting that lighter rod again. It has 20-pound Power Pro braid and about 10 metres of 20-pound Troll Pro leader. And of course the jig hook that I mentioned earlier. Oh, something he's not giving up on it. Oop. Oh, the other one too. I've got them on both. Shit. You might have to reel one fish in. Yep, I got this one. If you're not feeling well, it's okay because the other one's sitting still for the moment. Oh crap. Oh crap. No, I got a fish, but I've also tangled the other lines tangled up in this one. Okay, I have to I'll try and hand line the fish in. Oh, jagged him too. I don't think he's big enough to keep. That's why he felt big. Little snapper. Just a baby. Yeah, throwing back. He's 30, 32, 30, 31 centimetres. Hey, he's undersized anyway. Oh, had the underwater camera out to take a picture of him when I threw him back. Forgot about it.
Are you able to pass me a screen?
Yep. Wow, what a tangle. If it had been a big fish, I would have lost it. But it was even smaller than I thought it was because it had jagged itself in the side, which accounts for why it felt so different while I was pulling it in. And I'll just note that this is on the jig hook, so the idea did work even if it didn't catch a bigger fish. Now I have to tackle the knot. Fortunately, my wife accompanied me on this trip, so she grabbed one line to keep tension on it while I tried to untangle the other line from it. I usually only spend a minute on a tangle, and if I can't untangle it in that time, I cut the line. Because there were 2 lines involved here, and because cutting the line would have meant cutting the entire leaders off, I persevered a little bit longer. In the end, I finished up cutting 1 line in order to speed things up a bit. It's debatable if it would have been quicker to cut both and re-rig. Fortunately, these things don't happen very often. There wasn't much fish activity at Harries, perhaps because it was a Friday, and judging by the number of boats, a lot of people had an RDO. Consequently, I couldn't get anywhere near any of my preferred structure. So to finish up the day, I decided to go back into the Rouse and try to get a few winter whiting at the chain banks to use as snapper bait on the next trip. I didn't have any whiting bait, either fresh or frozen, but I had picked up a new packet of small gulp worms. I was using 6-pound mono with 2 No. 6 Troll Pro long shank baitkeeper hooks and a 1/2 ounce sinker on a paternoster rig. Since the hooks are quite small, I decided I could get away with 1/2 a gulp worm on each. That made me happy because with the price of lures and soft plastics these days, it pays to stretch them as far as possible.
Oh. Okay.
You can see here on the GPS display that I was basically drifting the same spot along the chain banks that I did a little over a month ago. And at the same time, just take note of the bait school that you can see on the sounder. Any of the banks in the area can hold bait. You just have to look for it.
Oh, double up, but only one that I want. Oops, he's off. He's got to go back. Dear. Come on. There you go.
I'm not sure what grabbed my line here. Whatever it was took it for a short run and then the line broke. The drag wasn't set too tight, so my best guess is that there was a weak point in the mono somewhere above the swivel. That's not too surprising because being a whiting rod that I don't use very much, maybe once or twice a year, the line is likely to be at least 5 or 6 years old, possibly more. It's only 6-pound line to start with, so at the very least I think I should strip off the top couple of layers and throw them out and see how it goes after that. Here's another look at some of the bait schools in the area. First on the Furuno TZ3, then on the Time0 unit. No matter where I go in the bay or what I'm fishing for, I can't seem to get away from the grinners. Now maybe my memory's failing, but I really can't remember catching a single grinner back in the 60s or early 70s. I only caught 3 whiting before I decided to call it a day. My wife was asleep in a cabin. It was nearly lunchtime and we decided that we'd pull up somewhere to have lunch, so that's what we did. But on the way out of the Rouse, I spotted a bust-up which looked like Bonito, so I manoeuvred into a position to have a cast. Every time that I got to within extreme casting distance, they went down. I always took the cast anyway, because I've often caught Bonito by casting into the bust-up after it went down. However, not today. A pity, because they make superb bait for the offshore pelagics. After several casts, my only reward was a rather large wind knot in my braid. This is my main casting rod for pelagics, and I've never had a wind knot in it before, but I'm using a slightly lighter slug on the end of it this time, and I think that could be why, so I'm going to go back to my normal slugs. So there you go. Not a stellar trip as far as catching a feed goes, but enjoyable nevertheless. Particularly so because my wife accompanied me this time, which is not something she normally does on a fishing trip. If you managed to get this far in the video, I hope you found something useful to add to your fishing knowledge. This is my take-home bait for the next trip. I used to cryovac my bait a good while back, but I stopped once I found the snap-frozen pilchards from Mr. Bait didn't really need it. I decided I'd resume using the cryovac machine on my fresh bait on the advice of a mate who always cryovacs his bait before freezing it, and he always does very, very well fishing. Thanks for taking the time to watch this. Until next time, good fishing.